All right, and we're live. Eric Erway, first in studio, in car session here.
Thank you, Kalen. No, this is something. This is quite a setup you've got here, Kalen. So
this is something.
Appreciate you having me.
Yeah, this is it should be fun. I've always, there's a lot of like in studio podcasts that people do, and there's a different energy when you're in person, so I've always kind of wanted to do that. I tried at one point to set something up at my house.
Yeah.
And I did like one with a buddy of mine, but the problem is nobody wants to drive all the way up there.
You're up there, but we're in Austin, though. We're not too far away, right?
We're not too far.
It's not a flight to Europe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then I thought, well, I could rent, a studio in Austin and but then, and then you got to rent things. So this ended up being the happy medium, and you're helping me pioneer it.
There we go. Let's work out the bugs, see what people think. This is awesome. So
let's figure it out.
It's awesome. I love, by the way, the test runs with your daughter.
Oh, yeah.
Like I think there's a lot, like all the parents out there, like there's a little bit of them they saw in each one of those. Like, I'm sorry, what are you doing again? And how does this like? Try explaining this, and so it's great though. Like this is the way to. It's great to see you.
Yeah.
By the way, in person.
Thanks.
Just be out of the office.
Yeah.
And this is good.
It's been a while.
Lots to talk about always.
Lots to talk about. It's been a while since we chatted at a conference. I don't know when. Way back when.
It may have been like one of the Austin conferences.
I think it was.
Yeah. Yep.
But so there's all the open source stuff going on. Yep. And by the way, I had realized recently that you guys open sourced Page Builder, which was super cool.
Yeah, we did. It was a big deal. We did that last month with 243, and again we've talked a little bit about it, but I think it's equally important what we did, but also how we did it. I mean, we knew there was interest, obviously, with the community, but we felt like it was the right time to advance with what we're doing. You've got both Elena and Dave doing a lot of the hard work there, and there's a lot of areas that we wanted to just advance, right? And so there's no better way to really to look at that than to start looking at areas of contribution and areas like that. And so we do have a couple of these teed up as soon as next week
cool.
with Adobe Developers Live. Going a little bit old school with Meet Magento Romania next week, and so that is a pocket of contribution that's still happening. So that was part of the plan. It wasn't necessarily just let's open source this. Let's open source and advance it. So yeah, it was a big deal. We're pretty excited about it. The feedback's been great.
Was that hard to push for internally? And by the way, if I ask questions that are like, hey man, we can't get too much into how the sausage is made, let me know.
It's fine. I think it's we don't talk enough, right? I mean, I think we spend a lot of time. I've used the phrase probably a lot the last 2 weeks. Like it's hard to really talk through things, 280 characters at a time. It's all got good intentions, but like this is where the context is. And Page Builder's a perfect example. That's been months in the making, and you've got to really plan with other teams versus just a handful of individuals, with marketing, with sales, with with leadership, and really understanding what that looks like and how that's done. It was a big step. It's something we'd been thinking about for quite some time. But it was more than just a few, and it was just something that we'd been thinking about, not even just a response, but something we've been planning to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, are you generally the one pushing more for the open source stuff internally?
Did we say we're not going to cover things that? No, I'm a product person, right? And so for me, I care deeply about adoption. I think open source obviously is in our DNA. I've been with Magento, now Adobe, for almost 7 years, so I've seen some depths, some depths and some history there. I think I actually still remember your feedback around the Magento 2 UX. When I first joined, about like, oh wow, this is really something, or I forget what you had said about it. But I've got a lot of history there, and that DNA is really important for what we're trying to do. And there's a lot of change that's happening. It's people, processes, technology. There's names and faces change, processes change, technology, even the industry has changed, right? As you look at all the things that are happening, not in just the community, but the industry, right?
Yeah.
And so we're evolving as part of that, but we're doing our best to capitalize on the DNA that's gotten us here. But that too, has to evolve, and we've made some changes that, with all the changes, are probably hard to keep up with. And so I think, if anything, I think the feeling over the last couple of weeks is like we have to find ways and channels to communicate that more, whether it's individually, through the association, through whatever means possible. And I think that's what makes it a two-way conversation, a conversation like this versus which often is kind of one piece at a time, right? It doesn't have the same context or the content as part of that. So
What do you think? What would you say to, let's say, that the people that are a little more on the fundamentalist side of open source, of, you know, Adobe doesn't get it. Yep. What do you think, like, what would you say to them about, you know, what your guys' position is, what you guys are trying to do, what you guys are trying to communicate?
Yeah, I think it's a bigger question, obviously. So I think, you know, from our standpoint, and I look at it in the areas that I have the most visibility in, right? Which is, so my team, it's, you know, I'm not just PW. I've got a great team, like with Elena, with Christian Partika, with a few folks that you've probably seen, or some new faces as well. And, you know, we're reorienting, you know, and we have around open source, around things like PWA, GraphQL, and others. And so in this world where, you know, at one point we were looking at open source for the full stack, but we've reoriented that. And that's been something that's consciously been done, certainly within our teams, but also as we look to the future as well. And that's you know, that's not unique to us for that one. So I think the open source question is a larger one, but it's really about time, investment, attention, and again, finding ways to communicate and collaborate in new and interesting ways. It's not, you know, it's not the same product it was, you know, 5, 6, 10 years ago, but it's also, that's okay.
Right.
That is okay. We've seen some really interesting innovation, especially as things have become more headless, and we've been inspired by it. We talk about PWA a lot, but that's just one of a lot of different examples. And so we've got to figure out how, I think it's an open question. I think open source, I think, is important. We've got to find ways to really, you know, capture that. And again, coming back to, I think something we talked about before is like, how do we harness this energy for all sides included? And so I think some of the discussion has been part of that.
Right. One kind of zoom in question. Like I was looking through some of the recent Twitter stuff, and David Alger had posted about the authentication related to repos, and then you had said, hey, this is on the it's on the to-do list, it's being tracked. And then what I was sort of wondering, right, because like David is a guy I've seen build a ton of really interesting stuff. He's the kind of guy that would I don't know, I'm guessing like he would help to try to solve some of these things or to build stuff. And like in that line between what's open source, what's discussed in the open versus which things are discussed as a company privately, like is that the kind of thing that you guys could just start hashing out in public, in GitHub, architecting?
Absolutely. I mean, you'll see this, and you've seen this like in new forums with like the weekly community and community engineering calls that they all often have, and they talk about like pretty deep topics about this. So Manalio was talking about this and referencing this in his post last night. But like these have all been kind of out there. But I think, you know, to the casual observer, it's a lot to keep up with. It's a lot to follow. And I think David's suggestion was a good one. Are there, you know, is that a slam dunk for us to do and say, yep, makes sense, we're going to get this done next week? Or are there reasons why it was the way it was? And so I think we've got to ask ourselves the questions on all sides, like what's the best path for this? And you know, from a user developer standpoint, are there inherent barriers to adoption? Again, I'm a product person. I care a lot about adoption. Or are there reasons for us to look at authentication in other areas that make more sense for X, Y, and Z? So I think, you know, I look at things like the open source task force, which is more immediate, but I think longer term, the association and or opening up those channels, like, you know, how do we get back to these conversations that we had in the events, in the hallways, and like in, you know, at DevEx, it's become harder because of the situations, but it's like, let's start talking about those and maybe ask why, you know, on some of these as well. So.
And that's probably a big part of it too. I mean, this whole thing where we're not seeing each other in person is affecting a lot of people in a lot of different ways, and it's probably contributing to like this thing you're describing of maybe a lack of communication. Yeah,
I've had a chance to talk to a couple folks kind of offline, even including a prominent community member yesterday, and you know, he was like, "This is, you know, it's like they understand when you talk to people, and it's like you understand." And I think that's where the context comes through. It's not like this one person or like representing all these things. It's where was that conversation? And it's understanding both sides of the story. I think that's the moment where we said, you know, we want to think about like when all these changes have occurred, whether it's, again, the people, the process, the technology, what's the best way to do that? Is it events? Is it white papers? Is it podcast? Is it webinars? Is it tweets? Is it a little bit of everything? All right, great. Who's going to do that? What's the best channels to do that? And by the way, what's the best channels to do that if you're a developer having to think about all of this, multiple platforms, multiple technologies, all of which are changing? it's a lot.
Yeah.
So it sounds cliche to say it's developer experience, but it's really about information, almost information architecture. Like how do you summarize that and get that in a way where people can understand, okay, this is what's going on. It may be change. Change can be good, but like how do they become part of that? And I think the way we've done things in community has been known and understood and done so familiarly for so long. It's easy to kind of go back to that. And I think that's the part of where we have to talk about that with by way of the association, by way of some of the things that have been brought up. That's okay.
Yeah.
That's absolutely okay.
Yeah. You mentioned the open source task force,
Yep.
and what's kind of the
What's going on with that?
Yeah, what's the deal?
So open source task force was actually started shortly before what we know as kind of the letter, right? And so this is something that we've seen.
The letter.
We've seen the need
Affectionately referred to.
affectionately known as the letter. So this is something we've been aware of. I think is a gap and an opportunity for us for a while. But like we said, how do we bring back the product inside of what has been the association, which is really a nonprofit. There are business needs. There are things that a nonprofit needs to do on a regular basis, but it had not been responsible or really had an active role in the product. You think about the events, you think about the communications, all
Right.
these things that are there. But
Right.
what does it mean to look at the product? And so the board had been talking about this for a while. Then there was the letter, but then the task force had already been there for the basically for the attention and the signups to show up for that. So fast forward basically to this week, the team with a lot of help has looked at roughly, and I'm not sure the exact number, roughly half dozen or so, maybe even more now because we've had a lot of interest of folks from the community to help influence this, with roughly 3 or 4 folks from the Adobe side, some familiar faces, some new ones, product engineering, to help talk through this. So whether it's David's question, that's fine. Whether it's some of the
figure
things
that stuff out.
let's just figure it out. Let's talk about that instead of talk with versus talk at, right? And I think that's a key distinction.
Right.
But you'll hear a lot more about it. Should be this week.
Right.
The names, the finalists are all being there. I know on our side we have a good idea what that looks like, and we've shared what that is. But that'll kick off hopefully a series of meetings as early as next week.
Okay.
So that's our hope.
Okay. That's cool. Yeah, I guess one of the things I wonder is like with for example, the thing with David where
Yep.
you have a guy who's not part of the, I can see why you guys want to get a group defined, have some people apply, pick some people, get a group. Now you've got a group of people that are kind of representative. But I guess there's part of me that likes the model where somebody can tweet something, post something on GitHub. They're not part of the formally defined group.
Yep.
But if it was possible in a more kind of decentralized way for somebody to jump in and say, hey, here's an idea,
Yep.
here's a suggestion, and then to just, if it's a good idea for everybody to start working on
Yep.
it, I see similar dynamics with the association where you guys I remember when people got picked for the association, I said, man, these people are great.
Yep.
These are all great people to be on the association. But then it's like, well, what if an idea comes from somewhere else? Can
Right.
that still be, actioned?
Yep.
You know what I mean?
No, I think that it's the openness and also what I've tried to avoid, at least internally, is the exclusivity of this, right? This is not this is not just my problem to solve. This is not anyone's problem to solve. We've got some really, great ideas from folks like Willem and Vinay and the usual suspects who've been in the community for a long, long time.
Yeah.
And that's noteworthy, right? You've got to how do you channel that, but also keep that openness such that you've got maybe that quiet, maybe that underrepresented voice in the crowd. That's what we want to watch out for. I think because I think we don't want to we want to do this the right way. We want to do this in an open way. And that works across both sides of it. So I think, we want to manage the exclusivity of this, but we also have to get things done necessarily too. So like anything, it's almost like building a product. It has to be prototyped, roughed out, and then be at a point where you would want to provide feedback. And so we've got a couple different forms of this, but to be honest, and I'm, my background actually is in computer science, but haven't been an engineer for a long time. So I think about the process piece a lot. Who's doing this really well? When we do this, if you're that voice, what is the best way to do it? Is it to tweet it, see what happens?
Yeah.
Is it GitHub? Is it like back in the old days with like Idea Storm or like the Salesforce? Like, there's all kinds of different tools that do that. Like, what is the most effective way?
Right.
And even in our own research, it's like you can't really put your finger on it, right? So events, you used to be able to do these at events, and it's a little tougher, right?
The old-fashioned way.
So I think we're open to the process, but there's also obviously the architectural and the engineering pieces where we have folks like Manayo, but also others from the engineering team who want to weigh in on this and figure out like how do we kind of harness this energy in a positive way that I think meets the needs for everybody involved.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
It's a tough one, right? And so, but I think the short answer is, how do we still maintain that openness amidst the more active ones that are involved?
Yeah, because like you mentioned that the board had been talking about for a while, and I had sort of sensed that. I'd seen the question asked, is the board going to have any responsibility for open source for the product? You mentioned that had been being discussed for a while, but then like what I'm wondering is like, wait, so why didn't anything happen?
Right.
Well, I'm assuming that it was maybe that the board floated it to Adobe, because obviously Adobe would have to give the approval for that kind of thing.
Yep.
And then it was just kind of in a waiting state.
Yep.
So I just wonder why that kind of got stuck in that state. You know what I mean?
No, totally.
I'm trying not to be too critical.
No. I think part of this comes down to the changes, right? I mean, you've heard from our leadership folks like Matt Zimmerman and others who have said very consistently internally, but also now externally, like we have no plans to end of support open source. But the next question is, okay, great. So what does that mean? And so it's a non-trivial discussion. It's a non-trivial decision. It's not any one person's. Certainly not mine. Of like, hey, great, let's go. But I think it's a conversation, right? It's a conversation where we got to think about what support means. We have to think about what innovation means. We have to think about what collaboration means. And I think we start there. Ownership is has its own has its own connotations, but I think there are parts of this. If you look at other products that are in open source, like Drupal and how that works with Aquia, like a few others. I know we've talked to the Typo 3 folks as well, and he's doing. I mean, his perspective was really spot on. I know you talked to him as well. Mm-hmm. Like, what really works well for us, and so I think ownership is important, but we need to figure out everything else first. Around that, and there's. But it's a non-trivial task. And
a lot of moving parts.
And a lot of moving people, right? There's been a lot of changes on our side, right?
Yeah.
There's been, with those changes, we're also trying to, rebuild the understanding of the function that, with some of the changes we've seen on our side with people who may be less familiar with that, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm spending a lot of time with that to make sure that they really understand really the opportunity that's in front of us, even in its current form. From that, and so it's hard.
It's hard.
With all the changes, there's that piece, but I want to figure out the how first versus the rest, and that's what I like about some of when we get this right, what things like upstream compatibility and all that means, because then we have basically areas for everyone to really thrive in, and that's a good thing.
Yeah. There's something about because I know you guys are all super talented engineering product, and yet there's a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of stakeholders. One of the things I personally like about what's happening with the Magento OS distribution and stuff is the simplicity of it. It's obviously a simplified use case. It's a smaller group of people. It's probably a infinitesimally smaller market, at least initially. Maybe it can grow, but there is something about and maybe it's nostalgia. I don't know that I have personally.
It's familiarity, right?
It's familiarity.
It's what right? So that's the thing. I think that's a good thing. Like it provides a starting point for a conversation, right?
Yeah.
Whatever it is, right? It's like it's a fork, it's a distribution. Well, it's a conversation. It's let's figure out really what that means.
It's a negotiation.
Well, not even. It's collaboration. There's been changes across the board. So what does that mean? And when you talk to everybody, yourself included, it's about how do we get involved? How do we innovate? How do we advance in areas that we see that potential, especially in commerce that is growing
Yeah.
at rates that we can't even possibly comprehend at this point, especially in the last 12 plus months, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's the thing. So I think there's that energy. It comes back to the energy. How do we harness that in a way that works well for everybody, as a developer, as a partner,
Yeah.
as a merchant? And there's just a lot of players that are involved in that. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I saw some posts by Lukash, I'm talking about, I always freeze
absolutely.
like that. And he had pulled out some really interesting data that was kind of showing some developers leaving the ecosystem, some downward trends, which, by the way, taking a meta step up, the fact that he can pull that data from Adobe, I don't know how that works, is really neat. I know
there's a lot of tools for GitHub that are pretty impressive on that. So,
yeah.
Sure.
But I had kind of sensed this thing. You see people leaving the ecosystem, you see people going to other platforms, and I had kind of sensed that. So to see that data was interesting, and it kind of confirmed the things that I felt. Now, at the same time, there's a lot of elements of the ecosystem that are doing fantastic.
Yep.
There's a lot of pockets that, or probably the majority of the market is doing great, moving up market. I mean, I see people getting paid more all the time.
Yeah, I saw a couple of yours. My goodness. Architects, Magento architect for
everybody's hiring a solutions architect, and so a lot of people are doing great. A lot of people are thriving, but there is this way in which, I don't know, a segment of the market is kind of dying off. And maybe that's just natural selection. Maybe that's just the market doing its thing, creative destruction. But do you guys sense that? Do you feel that? Do you feel that that pull?
I think somewhat. It's a hard. So I think data can tell a lot of different stories, right? I think some of the feedback when we saw on this was, to some degree, that's surprising, but not. I mean, so when you say not surprising, when was the last time we had like an all-out contribution day? Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we've been really clear about, although again we don't talk probably enough about it beyond slides or like this, is we continue to hear from our end customers about basically simplifying that upgrade process. We've introduced some really interesting tools to help with what that looks like, at the patch release series, at the MITRE release series, and even some things we've done on security only releases. Like we know that upgrading takes time, and it's not always the first thing top of mind for someone who's planning those out. And so we've had to look at contribution in other areas that have made that process a bit more complicated. So I think surprised but not. I think for the nostalgia, yes, let's see let's see every possible idea that's on the table and then put it right in to the product. I think we have to be thoughtful about that. And I think there's also been a technology shift as we looked at headless, and we've seen this with different heads, and it's not just PWA. People, there is inherent, there's headlessness in the community, right? Where you've got people who are working on storefronts, you've got people working on APIs, people working on platforms, and that's an evolution that's not, although you see it in the numbers, is not unique to our not unique to Magento. We just, as a long timer, you're expecting everything to look like this, but part of it is just that customer perspective, and that's been part of our strategy to make sure that gets easier and easier with adoption with everybody, and it has. But we also have to find ways to simplify the complex. Yeah. So that's basically that's part of it. But contribution days, that really focus there. It's very different this year than last. It's very different last year than the year before. But you'll see pockets of it. Again, we're going to have some representation. I was just talking to Vlad about this for Meet Magento Romania. Like we'll have a pocket of that at Meet Magento Romania end of next week. We're going to look at a couple opportunities across. So we have actually a couple groups. So the PWA team will be there. GraphQL and Page Builder team will be at Adobe Developers Live next week as well. So you'll see pockets of this in new forms. Right? This is not Imagine as you know it. It's not Magento Live as you know it. But they are there. But it's a little bit more, maybe more thoughtful, more focused on the areas where we are seeing some of that demand and change. Right. That's cool. I think the show title is going to be a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of moving parts. It's a lot of moving parts. Yes. There's definitely part of me that's like, Magento. I want. And when I talked to Willem, and he was expressing that he wanted Magento to have this long, fruitful lifetime, maybe in a form that we're more familiar with. Seeing that orange logo, maybe, or some version of it. Sure. And there is for Magento open source, right? It's got its own distinct brand, right? I think I love his energy. I love and so that's that's hard. That's hard to overlook in any
Yeah.
situation. And many of us know him. I remember meeting him. I've met him several times at at dev exchanges or contribution days, things like that. You've seen this, and I've seen some of the work that he was working on with Baylor, which was our JavaScript bundling product, and you could see it. You could see it coming, and so it's about harnessing that energy. And so I think in many ways we get it.
Yeah.
And so how do we figure that out? For what the goals that they want to accomplish and the goals that I think the larger ecosystem and even the company are just trying to do as well. So a lot of moving parts. What are some of the things you're excited about in general? I know you mentioned the meetup that's coming up and some of the contribution days. Yeah, so we're really, there's October. I can't believe. October has always been like this, I think. But when you step back, you look there's 4 events that are happening. But I think whether it's Magento Association Connect, whether it's Adobe Developers Live, which is a stronger commerce presence than we've had. Romania, we've got Singapore coming up in November. That's
cool.
just the beginning of what that is. And so I think you'll see those familiarities, but I think I also get excited about some of the work that we're doing in key areas. Obviously, I've been a big proponent with what Dave and Elena are doing, even on PWA Studio. We've got some exciting things that are happening there. We can't move fast enough as usual, but we're seeing some interesting customers do some pretty complex things, what we're doing out of the box. And so that's encouraging.
Nice.
For us. And so the events are just a part of it, but I think I'm also looking forward to more conversations and even smaller meetups. I was talking to a few of the folks on the team today, because we're, again, back to how do we open things up and making sure we're not making things too exclusive on even these conversations. What if we just had a monthly coffee in Austin? Bring that back. I know we don't have a anymore, but
that's probably a good idea.
Let's just talk. We can be distance, we can be outside, whatever have you, but let's just talk. And it reminds me of the 90s, special interest groups, the BBSs, are all getting together. That was my day. What does it mean? Just let's talk through some stuff. No slides. First person opens up a laptop, close, let's talk.
I love it. I really appreciate the way that you engage with the community. You're out here in a car, in the park.
You call, we answer. I appreciate it, man. I appreciate the opportunity. It's that we don't talk enough, honestly. Yeah. And so we set this up on short notice, and I just, besides obviously testing out what is a pretty amazing setup here.
That's one word.
We need to talk more, and I hope this isn't hope this isn't the last time. We need to keep this up. I think we'll want to bring other folks in for their perspectives. I love what you're doing. You're talking to many of the movers and shakers, the moving parts,
right,
at all the right times, right, because of all the changes that are happening, and then but it's a two-way conversation as we find ways, not only just with the product, but how we channel things the right way to either recapture the ways that really worked well as we collaborate and work together, but also to do so with the barriers that we do have, like travel and presence and things like that. Let's figure those things out, because I do think there's a little bit of that I think that could help the how with what we're all doing. Because one conversation to have with people, even some of the more vocal ones, you talk to them in person, go, okay, I kind of get it. Yes, I have a problem with this. Yes, I have a question about that. Okay, now I get it now. That part's really, really important.
Yeah.
So connecting is super important.
I appreciate how you engage, man. Like you said, you're 7 years in. And you care, you really care.
I really do, and I have to sit on both sides. We've got I'm kind of Switzerland on many of these, but it's not like I'm deliberately. I don't have this master plan to elude one or the other. I think I want to see the community thrive. I want to see Adobe take some of these things that we're doing and some of the things that we're planning to new heights.
Right.
There's a lot of potential here, but we can't forget about where we came from in this, and so with all the changes. Yeah, for me, I want to make sure we don't lose that. And when, I think these conversations, I think the community and just feedback, just like any other product, if you look at the community itself as a product, feedback is super important for the successes of that. And so I appreciate every opportunity of yourself and others reaching out. We can't do this enough.
Yeah.
It's going to be more, and hopefully it'll be more than just me, right? And so I am not everything, but I certainly do care a lot about it.
Yeah,
so that's for sure.
That's awesome. We have seen a few people, long timers that have left.
Yep, that's true.
And so it's good to have you continue to care and stuff. You mentioned that PWA Studio, you're seeing some interesting complex use cases. What are some of those?
Honestly, some of the bigger ones. So we've got a big release V12 coming out in a couple weeks, which is awesome. But we're seeing massive, Fortune 50 customers that we'll be announcing pretty soon that are using this. But within B2B, one of the most interesting things we're seeing is that people are actually working ahead of our roadmap. They see the fact that like GraphQL is pretty easy to use once you've played around with it for a little bit, and working ahead with some of the B2B use cases and what they're trying to accomplish. It's not your cookie, and it's not your static website anymore. And so some of the things we've seen in the earlier days with what Brendan and folks did at Selco, at Watsco, what JH did at Selco, like they did, like those workflows are really, really interesting because they take advantage of some of the capabilities of P2A, which is more than just headless, more than just a service worker, but like the experiences that we often really, really like to see in native that are once reserved for that. So B2B is, I think, something that gets me particularly excited. Some of the things we're doing in that, where we're introducing a new Oasis reference next year. We've done some UX work on that one. That will be kind of the B2B version of Venya. That part, it gets me excited. I get excited when I see our customers use this. I get excited when they challenge us to look at things in different ways.
Right.
Because ultimately, that's what keeps us going.
Nice.
So, yeah.
Dumb question. What's an Oasis reference?
Oasis is that's the fake store name of
right.
Madison Island. Brett Mill. Have you heard of Brett? You remember Brett Mill for M2?
Brett Mill.
So Brett Mill is the less, it wasn't distributed, but it was the B2B demo that was Luma based.
Oh, okay.
That you would see here in this. So we're going to distribute this, but Oasis is like the B2B venue.
Got it. Okay.
For that one. So, but there's unique components and things like that are part of that. So, which is
nice.
Cool. So,
nice.
Yeah, more to come on that next year. We can't work on that fast enough, but we've got some really great partners in UX have done some advanced work on that.
Okay,
so, yeah.
Nice. And the GraphQL API cover, I'm pretty far out of the loop on some of the technical details, but API is the API coverage pretty far along?
Is B2C, we feel really good about B2C. There are, just like anything else, no product is ever done. No GraphQL coverage is ever done. Like Benayo was talking a little bit about that in his post, but
could you mentioned his post, which I haven't read yet. Could you summarize that a little bit? Because I know
summarizing it. It said it was a 5-minute read on.
It was a lot.
LinkedIn,
okay.
It was more, I think, than that.
I should talk to him.
I would talk to him. He's on parental leave, so his time may be limited. But he started to really, and I think in a very satisfying way, started to kind of look at some of the concepts and constructs that Vinay and Willem had talked through around backwards compatibility and what that means. I'll be honest, I can't do it as much justice as he does, but
makes two of us.
It's the beginnings of what that task force will start to kind of unpack and understand of that, and say, and I think that's a good thing. For me, that's the big takeaway on that.
Okay.
But yeah, I encourage you to take a look at it. And we've seen a lot of great posts. Talesh did a great one recently as well. It's in many ways, it's like we're bookmarking, keeping up with it, understanding, and the themes are always very consistent. But it's good to hear. It's really good to hear all of that.
Yeah, everybody's getting their 2 cents in.
They are. I know. I want to do one of my own, but I also feel like that's also the opposite of what I want to do, which is to have conversations. Like let's just talk. Let's have coffee every month. Like let's get out there and ask those questions, talk through that.
Yeah.
And not have to follow everything as well. And that's why we're really hopeful. I think we're really hopeful about where this is going to go. I think we get it. Especially when we talk to a lot of the folks, even some of the more vocal people in person, Zoom, what have you. That's been really helpful.
Yeah. That's great. That's great. Well, we got to get this coffee going.
We do.
So where are we going to do that?
It's National Coffee Day, and we've got a lot of great.
Oh wait, you had a thing here that you were going to present on camera, right?
It's just a token of appreciation. So.
Oh, this is fantastic. Yeah, this is
it's National Coffee Day for those.
Is today National Coffee Day?
And so I'm a big fan of coffee. People will recognize me with like a massive cup of coffee on most meetings, whether it's middle
just
of
a
night
gigantic one.
Just massive. So. And I think you're a big fan as well.
I'm a coffee. I love it. I love it. Vedia. Hey, that's awesome. All right, I like it. I'm going to be using this.
There you go.
That's great. Super cool. No, I didn't realize today was National Coffee Day. That's fantastic.
I did. Yeah, just saw the trends. We've been looking at Twitter a lot lately.
Yeah.
And so that popped up.
Since the letter.
Since there's a lot of moving pieces. And so,
awesome.
we're always listening. We care tremendously about what we're doing, but also how we're doing it. And so keep us honest when we're not, and let us know how we can help. And again, if anything, we're accessible, and we want to make sure that we're not only getting the word out, but we're making change towards a lot of this in terms of how this all works together. So,
yeah. Awesome, man. Well, I think we're pretty much wrapped. Anything you want to point people to? Any web links as we get ready to close it out?
That's a tough one. I should have like a QR code or something.
Yeah,
you
yeah.
can kind of scan that in.
Link them to a QR code, maybe.
Hey, we're pretty easy to find. So I would say, look for us. If you need something, let me know. I'm pretty quick to respond. But yeah, we're out there.
Sounds good. All right.